Imagine the dusty twilight wrapping around a lonely saloon, where shadows stretch like slow yawns of the frontier. You stepped inside, just as the sun's last embers flickered behind jagged hills. The heavy air greeted you first, thick with tired oak and the bitter bite of stale ale long past its prime. The creak of the swinging doors behind you seemed louder than the fading chatter, as if time itself was dragging its boots through the tired floorboards. You slid onto a worn wooden stool, its graying rough against your palm. Not nearly as comfy as your couch back home, but this was the Wild West. The promise of a grand feast? Forget it. Here, the food was as plain and uninviting as the dusty street outside. Cold beans, long since reheated over a fire that had no fire left to give. Jerky so tough it felt like a medieval chew toy, paired politely with thick slabs of bread that were more filler than flavor. You could almost hear your modern lunchbox snicker from a century away. If your lunch today feels uninspired, imagine reheating beans over a fire that's only just as tired as you. No microwaves here, just a dim, flickering hearth that offered little warmth beyond burnt smells and the occasional stubborn spark. The coffee, brewed in a blackened pot, emitted a bitterness that danced between burnt toast and old ash. It was the kind of drink to wake you up and remind you why black tea feels like a hug in comparison. Outside, the rhythm of the evening played its own lullaby, the steady thud of horse hooves meeting cracked earth, wagon wheels grinding over stone. It was a soundtrack of slow, endless repetition. Inside, you saw the same, peeling potatoes by hand, each stab of the knife a measured motion. A bartender scrubbing the same rough tables under the weak glow of oil lamps, their light barely pushing back the creeping night. The scene was less a bustling tavern and more a slow dance with monotony. Spices of this frontier kitchen weren't exotic salts or fragrant herbs from distant lands. No, more often they were local weeds, sagebrush, wild thyme, that barely masked the blander-than-expected fare. You imagined these ingredients wheezing through the rough cook's fingers, as resigned to the routine as you were to the dust in your boots. And yet, amid this plainness, the saloon held its charm, not in grandiosity, but in the quiet, shared endurance of days that refuse to be rushed. Each person here, from weary riders to barkeep, seemed caught in a loop, drawn along by the simple ritual of coming back to this same place, the same smells, the same sounds. Then, as your eyelids began their slow descent toward sleep, a sudden, sharp sound snapped through the low murmur, a quick, deliberate knock at the far end of the bar. Heads twitched, eyes met. The steady cigars and creaking stools seemed to pause. Whatever this night was going to hold, it wasn't finished yet. Hey, before Morpheus takes you completely, quickly check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button disappeared, and I don't want you to miss the upcoming sleep stories. Go ahead and drop a like, as soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this calm corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. The knock echoed again, softer this time, but charged, like a secret waiting to be told. The bartender glanced up, eyes narrowing under heavy lids. Few turned their heads, but everyone noticed. Your pulse, already steady, like the slow, worn creak of the floorboards, quickened. Whatever had been simmering beneath the surface of this slow, dusty evening was stirring. The door at the far end of the saloon swung open quietly, admitting a figure framed by the fading light, a silhouette etched in shadows and dust. The newcomer's boots thudded lightly against the wood as they approached. A long coat, stiff with desert grit, brushed the backs of tired patrons. The quiet footsteps broke the almost hypnotic rhythm of mundane motion. The scraping of chairs, the soft muttering about weather and horse feed. You shifted on the stool, feeling the rough grain bite into your palm, like a reminder of just how far from home you really were. The scent of stale ale and burnt coffee mingled almost sarcastically with the fresh, dry wind that had followed the stranger inside, a contrast as sharp as a cold stare on a hot day. The bartender's fingers stilled. The dim glow of the oil lamps cast a flicker of uncertain light against the stranger's face, half hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat pulled low. For a moment, it was as if the saloon itself held its breath. Then a voice, low and gravelly, barely above the rustle of the desert outside. "I'm looking for someone. Goes by the name of Jack." A pause stretched, thick with old stories and unspoken rules. Jack was a name carried on the cracked lips of many, a ghost in the frontier's tale, or a man tangled in shadows the kind of folk preferred to avoid. You could see the bartender hesitate, then slowly nod towards the back corner, where a man sat alone, nursing a drink that looked more like a punishment than pleasure. His face was worn, furrowed like the earth outside after a drought, with eyes sharp enough to split a cactus in two. You leaned in, almost smelling the tension developing like sparks over dry tinder. The saloon had shifted from a slow dance with monotony to a tightrope walk between calm and chaos. The murmurs had died. Only the steady drip of cold sweat from the lantern's rim punctuated the silence. The man in the corner looked up. For a heartbeat, your eyes met his. A flicker of recognition, maybe regret, or something older, buried deep beneath years of dirt and dust. Jack, or whoever he was, seemed to carry the weight of countless dusty miles and decisions better left in the shadows. Outside, the wind stirred, the last smudge of twilight, to a reluctant end. The sky's bruised hues faded into a blanket of stars, indifferent witnesses to whatever dance was about to unfold within these tired walls. You could almost feel it, the pulse of a story thickening, winding like a rattlesnake in the sand. No grand feast awaited you here. No roaring fires or tales told with the gusto of a barkeep hungry for an audience. Just the plain, unvarnished truth of a place where dust settled on more than just boots. The stranger's voice sliced through the stillness once more. He's got what I need. A laugh, dry and brittle, cracked from the back of the room, a sound that mocked both hope and foolishness. The bartender's hands clenched at the edge of the counter. The silence reigned for a heartbeat longer, fragile as a spider's web swaying in the desert breeze. Then, the saloon door slammed shut. You felt it then, a shift in the thickened air, like the slow tightening of a noose you didn't see until the last moment. The routine was over. The slow, steady hum of monotonous survival had given way to something sharper, more immediate. The stranger moved toward Jack, footsteps measured but sure. A whisper passed between them, low and urgent, words almost lost in the cough of a nearby rider, the scrape of a chair pulled back hastily. Whatever peace this place pretended to hold was fracturing, cracking like the dry earth beneath your boots. You swallowed the bitter tang of coffee from your throat, the burnt bitterness, now a fitting metaphor for the unfolding scene. As the oil lamps flickered, casting shadows that grew longer and darker than the night itself, you knew one thing for certain. This saloon, with its tired boards and weary souls, was about to become the stage for a reckoning the frontier had been holding at bay. And in that moment, as the unsaid threats bled between glances, and knives seemed to shimmer just beneath slow smiles, the question hung in the air like smoke. Who was really holding the cards in this dusty game? The stranger's boots tapped with quiet certainty, each step a deliberate punctuation on the creaking floor. The saloon, once heavy with the slow, resigned breaths of routine, now held its breath in a fragile silence, stretched taut like worn leather about to snap. Jack lifted his eyes, slow and steady, like a predator weighing the scent of the wind before deciding to strike or retreat. The lines carved deep into his sun-beaten face told stories without words, long roads, harder choices, and nights filled with uneasy dreams. His gaze slid over the newcomer with a flicker of recognition and something darker, a shadow folding into the corners of those tired eyes. "I ain't the man you think, stranger," Jack murmured, voice gravel rubbed smooth from years in endless dust. The newcomer's hat tilted just enough to catch the faint glow of the oil lamp, revealing a mouth curved in something between a smirk and a warning. "That don't matter. I've been sent with a message, and you're the one holding the answers." A sigh slipped from the bartender. his rag pausing mid-wipe. Behind the bar, a few patrons exchanged uneasy glances, but said nothing. The air, thick and hot, with the scent of stale ale and burnt coffee, felt suddenly brittle, as if a gust of wind could shatter it like dried glass. You shifted on the stool, the wood biting into your palm almost like a test, a reminder that this was no place for comfort. Outside, the wind brushed against the saloon's weathered frame, rattling the windows and carrying with it the first whispers of night. Jack finally pushed his empty glass aside and stood, his frame folding into the dim light like a black silhouette erased slowly by a dying fire. The stranger's eyes flickered as they followed, sharp and unblinking under that brimmed shadow. "You've been running for a long time," the stranger said softly. "But some debts don't forget. Some stories don't let you go as easy as a desert sunset." Jack's jaw tightened, a brief flash of anger or maybe regret flickering beneath the surface. "Do the folks out there know what you're after? What you'll drag back down here with you?" There was a pause so thick you could taste it, sweet and sour at once, like burnt coffee poured over old leather. The stranger didn't answer. Instead, he reached into the folds of his coat and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. The edges were ragged, stained with time and travel. Jack's eyes narrowed, fingers twitching beneath the bar to the pistol holstered at his side. The motion was slow, measured. Not a reckless gamble, but the quiet readiness of a man who's danced with danger enough to know its rhythm. "You're not the first to come around asking questions," Jack said, voice low. "And you won't be the last. But sometimes the answers don't look like the questions you hope to hear." The stranger unfolded the paper and held it close to the flickering lamp. You squinted to catch the handwriting, angular, hurried, almost desperate. It was a list, but not of names or debts, symbols, marks you didn't recognize at first, ancient and cryptic, like a map that had been folded and unfolded too many times in hands that trembled with fear or greed. "Where'd you get this?" Jack asked, his voice barely a thread of sound. "Found it where the dust never settles, out where the land forgets men's names. Somebody's trying to rewrite the rules." The bartender cleared his throat softly. The sound barely more than a breath, but it split the silence. A few heads turned, eyes flicking between Jack and the stranger, and then back to you, as if you held the key to what might come next. Jack's gaze finally lifted to the far window, where the last light of day slipped away, swallowed by the indifferent night. Outside, the desert revealed its stars, endless pinpricks of cold fire, watching silently. "You want my help," Jack said, "but the things you're chasing?" He paused, swallowing whatever old ghosts knot his throat. "They'll burn everything to ash if you're not careful." The stranger's smile was thin, almost pitying. "Sometimes you have to burn the old to make way for the new." A cough from a corner rider cut through the room, sharp and unexpected. Chairs scraped back in sudden motion. The saloon's fragile calm cracked, spilling tension like dry tinder ready to ignite. You felt your own heart pulse, steady no longer, quickening to a rhythm that echoed the crackle of unseen flames creeping closer. The lingering smell of burnt coffee and stale ale suddenly felt like a warning, as if the walls themselves whispered secrets you hadn't yet uncovered. Outside, the wind kicked up again, pressing against the door like the restless hand of fate itself. The air grew cooler, slicing through the thick haze of the day's heat, carrying with it a scent strange and sharp, copper and earth, the promise of both violence and revelation. The stranger turned back to Jack, voice low and urgent. "It's not just some score to settle. There's a plan now, something bigger than either of us." Jack's eyes darkened, the weight of the unknown settling deep. His hand drifted away from the pistol, resting on the counter instead, fingers tracing the grain of the wood that had seen better days. "And what, I'm supposed to just walk into that storm? Carry this foolishness like a badge?" "It's not about walking," the stranger said. "It's about choice." Outside, something shifted. A shadow detached itself from the blackness beyond the saloon's doors and moved like a ghost, silent and deliberate. The saloon's low murmur returned, but it was different now, woven with tension, laced with the unspoken promise that this night was far from over. You glanced toward the door as the shadow paused there, a figure framed by moonlight and dust, waiting for the moment to step inside. The air thickened again, heavier now, as if the night itself was holding its breath. And you knew, without being told, that whatever game was about to play out here, the stakes were far higher than a few dusty lives. Because some secrets buried in the desert don't stay quiet forever. And in that silence, you could almost hear the desert whisper one final warning. The storm has just begun. Jack's eyes tracked the stranger's silhouette as the faint moonlight brushed across that stubborn-brimmed hat. Each step the newcomer took, stirring the heavy air with a promise that the night's slow pulse was quickening. The saloon's usual soundtrack, the creak of shifting stools, the low murmur of tired voices, had fallen into a hush so thick it seemed to absorb every breath, as if this moment itself weighed too much to share. You shifted again on your stool, the rough grain biting firmly into your palm, a tactile reminder that ease had no place here. The scent of burnt coffee and stale ale, once merely background noise, now felt like a shroud, wrapping the space between men poised on the edge of unraveling something too long left buried. Jack's gaze didn't waver as he straightened, the slow, deliberate motion cracking the silence like a dry twig beneath boots in a forest. His voice returned, gravel-laden and low. "You say there's a plan, bigger than either of us. What kind of storm you bringin' here, stranger?" The newcomer's smirk deepened, a shadow flickering over the worn lines of that face half hidden beneath the hat's fall. a kind that doesn't ask permission, rules rewritten in dust and blood, and you're the key. The words hovered, weighty and cold, before he slid the crumpled paper across the bar. Paper that smelled faintly of leather and desperation. You leaned closer, the edges of the strange symbols almost dancing in lamplight, each stroke a knot to unravel. The saloon's quiet intruded, whispers threading through the shadows. An old poker player spat under his breath, the scrape of a boot dragging against floorboards. Outside, the wind stirred, pressing cold fingers against the weathered windows, like suspicious eyes peeking into the darkness. Jack's fingers twitched near his holster, a muscle ready to either draw or resign. And what if I say no? What if this dust-covered hell stays as forgotten as it was yesterday? The stranger's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Then what's left will burn, and no one will remember to mourn the ashes. That silent threat twisted through the air like smoke from a slow-burning wick. Your heart echoed in your chest, no longer a calm drum, but a ragged beat, hinting at the storm rising just beyond the threshold of this worn refuge. Suddenly, a sharp clatter shattered the fragile stillness. The saloon door slammed against the wall with a force that rattled the lamps and sent a shiver through the gathered souls. Every eye jolted to the entrance, where shadows grew and twisted like creatures waking from a long sleep. A figure emerged, not the stranger who had moved with quiet predation, but someone else entirely. More ghost than man, cloaked in dust and moonlight, steps muffled across the floor like a threat masked in silence. Jack's jaw clenched. The bargains of the past were splintering under the weight of new arrivals. Beside you, breaths caught and eyes darted. This was no simple meeting under tired oil lamps. The air tightened as if the very walls braced for the weight of what was to come. You caught the faintest smile from Jack, bitter but resolute, the kind born in the furnace of hard roads and harder choices. "Welcome to the reckoning," he said, without turning. The newcomer's lips curled, a flicker of something near respect, mixed with warning. "Reckon with what, Jack? The past, the debts, or the ghosts that refuse to die?" Outside, the desert sighed, a wind that carried the scent of scorched earth, the dry snap of brittle leaves long dead. The night thickened, stars blinking like cold fires, watching an unseen battle about to unfold. You focused back on the paper, the strange symbols suddenly pulsing with meaning, just out of grasp. The storm wasn't coming. It was already here, wrapping its fingers around this dusty saloon, shaking loose secrets not meant for quiet nights or easy drinks. A rider's cough broke the tension, sudden and raw, reminding everyone of fragile mortality, lingering just beneath the bravado. The saloon's patrons exchanged glances, thick with unspoken questions and silent prayers. Jack's hand, resting on the counter's worn wood, twitched a fraction. The stranger's eyes locked onto his with a quiet insistence. "Every choice draws a line," the stranger said softly, "and falling on the wrong side means losing more than just a life." You swallowed hard, the burnt coffee's bitter taste turning into an anchor, a reminder that comfort was a fleeting luxury, far from the faded comforts of home. The desert's breath pressed in, cool and unyielding. From the corner of your eye, you caught a flicker, a movement, fluid and deliberate, at the threshold of the saloon. Someone watching, waiting for the right moment to step out of shadow and into the fray. And then the question, thick as smoke in the air, turned into a whisper for all but you. Who's really holding the cards in this dusty game? The stranger's boots tapped once more, a deliberate heartbeat against the worn floor. Jack's gaze sharpened with the edge of 1,000 hard miles. The silence broke, and the night exhaled. But you knew, deep down, the story was far from over. Because sometimes, the desert keeps its secrets locked tight, until the day the dust decides to bleed. The newcomer's eyes gleamed faintly as he stepped closer, the flickering lamplight casting half his face in shadow. His voice, low and deliberate, swirled through the thick, stale air. "This isn't just about what's buried in the dust, Jack. It's what's been forgotten or erased." Jack's gaze held steady, the harsh lines around his eyes a map of countless skirmishes, both with other men and with himself. He let out a breath that tasted like the grit settled deep in the desert soil. Forgotten or not, whatever you're chasing won't be found by stirring up old ghosts. The saloon seemed to press in tighter, the worn wooden beams creaking, as if burdened with unspoken warnings. Outside, the wind snaked its way through the cracks, carrying the weight of dry leaves and broken promises. The faint rattling of a loose shutter echoed a restless rhythm against the night. You shifted on your stool, feeling the rough grain bite a little deeper into your palm, like the world reminding you that some comforts were miles and centuries away. The air was thick with tension, so thick you could almost taste it, bitter like the burnt coffee long gone cold. Jack's fingers brushed against the worn neck of his bottle, more habit than thirst. Where did this plan come from? Who's pulling the strings behind that paper? His voice was rough, but the edge behind it held a flicker of wary curiosity. The stranger smiled thinly, the kind of smile that hinted at secrets shared over campfires long since extinguished. Words travel slower than bullets on this land, but when the dust settles, they leave marks. That map, he tapped the crumpled paper, was found on a man who didn't believe in staying quiet. Now those marks are leading us to a reckoning no one is ready for. Behind the bar, the bartender paused, rag mid-wipe, his dark eyes narrowing. A few patrons exchanged looks that mixed uncertainty and grim understanding. No one here was a stranger to danger, but tonight the shadows carried something sharper, something that scraped against the bones. Jack's gaze flicked over the faces, lingering briefly on yours. The weight of unspoken choices hung heavy. "And what's in it for you?" he asked finally, voice a slow drawl wrapped in suspicion. The newcomer's hat tipped back just enough to reveal eyes that held storms beneath a calm surface. "Let's just say I'm not here for the scenery." He leaned closer, the scent of dry earth and leather carried in his breath. "What's coming? It's bigger than any of us, bigger than Jack or me or this dusty corner of the world." The stillness in the room rippled, as if even the shadows shivered in anticipation. The faint tick of the old clock, somewhere behind the weave of the boards, marked time passing too slowly and too fast, all at once. Your heart, which moments ago had settled into the quiet throb of routine, now picked up pace, matching the subtle crackle of tension threading through the saloon. Something was shifting, not violently, but like the slow and inevitable pull of a desert storm gathering on the horizon. Jack finally picked up his glass, swirling the remnants of dark liquid as if divining the future from the bottom of the cup. "This reckoning of yours," he murmured, "does it come with a warning? Or just a trail of ashes?" The stranger's gaze deepened, eyes narrowing in a way that suggested he'd seen the trail's scorched end before. The warnings in those marks, symbols of power and pain, etched by hands desperate to rewrite what's true. You don't want to know what happens if this isn't stopped. A sudden rattle at the door made every head snap toward the entrance. Gust motes danced in the sudden shaft of moonlight, cutting through the doorway, revealing a figure paused just beyond. Silent, unmoving. A drip of cold air slipped inside, snaking through the tight space like a lurking predator. Jack's hand tightened around his glass, knuckles pale. The newcomer's quick glance told the tale. This was no accident. The door creaked slowly as it opened wider, the figure's shadow stretching long across the worn floor. The saloon seemed to hold its breath once again, the cautious murmurs dissolving into hollow silence. You watched as the stranger's lips curled into a grim line. "You weren't expecting company," he said, voice low but edged with warning. Jack's eyes locked onto the newcomers, a tragic resolve settling into their depths. "The past ain't done with us yet," he said, standing tall, despite the weight dragging at his shoulders. "And from the looks of it, neither is the future." Outside, the wind swelled, rattling the timbers and pushing whispers through the cracks, like the desert itself was speaking warnings few cared to heed. The stars above blinked steadily, unblinking witnesses in the vast dark. You swallowed hard, the acrid tang of burnt coffee reminding you that this was no place for easy answers. The stories weaving here were old and tangled, their threads soaked in secrets and dust. The newcomer's gaze shifted to the stranger at the door, eyes sharp and calculating. Then back to Jack, voice dropping even lower. This game's been played in shadows for too long. It's time the truth sees daylight, no matter the cost. Jack's jaw clenched, his hand moving slowly toward the worn grip of his pistol. But he didn't draw. His voice was steady, a low vow in the fading light. Then let's see if the desert's ready for the storm coming to wake it. Outside, the night deepened, the stars swallowed by an encroaching darkness, thick with promise and peril. And as the quiet grew just before the storm's first breath, you realized what was whispered long ago by the dust. Some debts refuse to rest in peace, and tonight those debts are about to collect. The air shifted as the lingering murmur folded into silence once more, heavier now, like a deep breath held too long beneath a scorching sky. You felt the rough wood under your palm, the weight of every creak and whisper pressing the moment tighter, as if the saloon itself was preparing to exhale a long-held secret. Jack stood tall, his silhouette a stark shadow brushed by the fleeting glow of the oil lamp. The faint lines of exhaustion in his eyes flickered like a fading trail of fireflies, remnants of battles fought far beyond this dusty refuge. His fingers twitched near the worn grip of his pistol, but not yet, not now. Instead, he exhaled slowly, voice hoarse but steady, the kind that carries the heaviness of a man burdened with more than names and numbers. "Your plan," he said finally, eyes narrowing beneath that dust-worn hat. "It ain't just some scribbles on old paper, is it? There's something behind those symbols, something waiting in the shadows." The stranger's smirk deepened, a faint curl of lips that spoke of secrets buried in desert winds and forgotten trails. "You're right to be cautious. Those marks, they're warnings, paths drawn by hands that have seen too much, whispered by ghosts who never quite found peace. And now, those paths are converging here." You adjusted slightly on the creaking stool, the wood scraping softly, a reminder this place had heard more confessions than shouts. The stale ale and burnt coffee scent seemed to thicken, as if the very atmosphere soaked in the tension tightening around every soul inside. Jack's gaze traced the faded wood grain of the bar, then flickered to the other faces quietly watching, eyes heavy with their own stories. A poker player's quiet cough, the scraping slide of a chair, the distant rattling of a shutter pushed by the desert wind. Each sound was a thread in the growing web, delicate but binding. The stranger's voice, cut low, deliberate, wrapping around the tight pause. It's not just a map or a message. It's an invitation, the kind that leads you straight into the storm before you know the weather. And Jack, you're already standing in the eye of it. Jack's jaw tightened, the muscle beneath his sun-roughened skin twitching like a raw nerve exposed. "Storms always roll in here," he said with a wheeze that was almost a bitter laugh. "But this one's carrying more than dust and dry lightning. You reckon anyone's ready for what it's bringing?" A whispered shuffle came from the far corner. A rider shifting his weight, gaze flickering toward the barely open door where the shadowed figure had hesitated. The saloon's once easy rhythm now felt fractured, each breath measured, steeped in a sudden awareness that the night had slipped over a knife's edge. Outside, the wind sighed again, brushing the cracked window panes with a cold finger, scattering dry leaves like ancient secrets across the porch. The sky, once bruised and fading, now sprawled wide, an indifferent canvas of stars burning. Distant and cold, Jack's voice dropped lower, carrying weight like broken glass in a leather pouch. "What's that thing you're chasing? What's gonna burn if we don't stop it?" The stranger leaned forward, shadows playing cruel tricks beneath his hat's brim. Not what, who. Power hiding in plain sight, in the cracks of history. Men who'd rather see the world turned over flame than admit the truth. And those marks, they're the doorway. Opening it means everything changes. The room shivered with a collective breath held too long. Even the bartender, rags stilled mid-wipe, watched with narrowed eyes. None here were strangers to danger, but tonight, risk wore new skin, a palpable chill beneath the familiar heat of survival. Jack reached slowly for his empty glass, swirling the last ghost of liquid into a lazy spiral, as if trying to read the future in the dregs. "Ain't just about surviving, then," he murmured. "It's about choosing which hell we want to walk into." You felt the knot in your gut tighten, the bitter aftertaste of that burnt coffee grounding you in the moment. This wasn't a story for easy chairs or soft pillows. It was lived in the cracks of worn boots and hard eyes. The door creaked again, wider this time, welcoming the shadowed figure fully into the saloon's cage of light and dust. The newcomer stepped through, shoulders squared beneath a coat heavy with untold miles. Silence wrapped around the room like a shroud. Jack's sharp gaze met the new arrival's icy stare, a challenge unspoken but understood. Some histories, you realized, weren't just stories to be told. They were reckonings to be faced. The stranger at the bar caught your eye for a brief moment, a flicker of warning, passing like a dry wind over sun-cracked earth. "The game's changed," he said softly. "And the stakes higher than any of us dreamed." Outside, the night deepened, pressing inward with a quiet menace. The wind gathered strength, rattling the timbers, carrying with it a whisper, the desert's own voice, long patient and unforgiving. The past isn't done with Jack, and the storm is no longer just coming. It's already breathing down our necks. The saloon's gloom deepened as the stranger's words hung heavy in the air, their weight sinking into the cracked floorboards and threadbare walls like a storm long brewing. You felt the rough grain press into your palm, a tactile anchor to the moment. Every breath tasted of burnt coffee and dust. Every eye fixed with a mixture of fatigue and barely veiled suspicion. Jack's silhouette moved with a slow, deliberate grace. He reached out, tracing the faded symbols on the crumpled paper with rugged fingers, as if trying to read secrets written between the strokes. "These marks," he murmured, voice hoarse yet steady. "They're more than signs. They're warnings carved by hands desperate enough to gamble everything." The stranger's gaze sharpened beneath his hat's brim. "Warnings that nobody's heeded," he said quietly. "And now the reckoning's on the horizon. You feel it too, don't you? The desert's breath shifting, catching on something old, but alive." Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the worn shutters with a soft, persistent clatter, a whisper of restless ghosts riding the cold night. The faint starlight pressed against the dark windows like distant, indifferent eyes, silent witnesses to secrets better left untouched. You shifted, the unforgiving hardness of the stool a reminder of the long miles and harder choices. Behind you, the bartender paused, rag halfway to the counter, eyes narrowing as he watched the dance between two men poised on the brink. The saloon had shifted, no longer merely a refuge from dust and drought, but a crucible where destinies mingled with danger. Jack's jaw clenched, the muscles ticking beneath sun-baked skin. "If this storm blows through," he said slowly, "it won't just tear up trails and dreams. It'll burn past and future alike." His eyes flicked toward the shadow by the door, the newcomer who'd now stepped fully into the flickering lamplight with the quiet confidence of a man used to stirring trouble. The stranger's voice dipped, low and fierce. "Some debts aren't paid with gold or grace. They're settled in blood and silence." This time, the silence stretched longer, thick as smoke and twice as choking. A soft cough broke the tension. A rider shifting in the corner, the scrape of boots on aged wood, and the fragile calm wavered as if the night itself was taking a careful step back. Jack's gaze swept around the room, resting momentarily on you. There was an unspoken challenge in his eyes, cold but honest, an invitation without choice. "There's a storm coming," Jack said, voice rough as the desert wind. "And I don't know if the land or the living will survive it. But I do know one thing. Running from it won't change what's coming." The stranger nodded once, sharply. "No one does, Jack. Not anymore." Outside, the wind whispered fiercely, tugging at the saloon's doors and rattling every loose board. You caught a flicker of movement just beyond the threshold, a shadow so still it was almost a part of the darkness itself, waiting. The air grew heavy, thickening with something unspoken but undeniably present. The past and the future tangled here in this dusty room, mixing with the harsh scent of stale ale and the bitter aftertaste of burnt coffee. Jack's hand found the worn grip of his pistol, fingers curling around the familiar cold metal. But the weapon stayed holstered, for now. Instead, His gaze locked with the stranger's in a silent exchange, charged with years of scars and secrets. "You say this game's been played in shadows too long," Jack said, voice low. "So what's the play now? Truths spat into the wind, or just more bones to bury?" The stranger let out a humorless chuckle. "Sometimes truth burns hotter than lies, and I reckon the fire's about to spread." The room seemed to contract, the air thick with anticipation and the weight of choices that could neither be undone nor ignored. Your pulse quickened, syncing with the faint creak of the saloon's timbers, as if the building itself was bracing for impact. A sudden gust slammed the door wide open, cutting a raw silence through the gathering tension. For a breathless instant, the saloon stood exposed to the wild night, the wind tearing at coats and hats, carrying with it the scent of earth and danger. Then footsteps entered, measured, steady, not the newcomers, but another's. A presence heavy with history and quiet menace, folding into the shadows like a dagger sliding into its sheath. Jack's eyes narrowed, muscles tightened. He took a slow step forward, the floorboards groaning softly beneath his weight. "You weren't expecting company," the stranger said, voice low but edged with warning, eyes flickering toward the door. Jack's smile was bitter but defiant, a flash of a man who'd been through too many battles to blink now. "The past don't just stay buried out here." Your own breath caught, the edges of the moment sharp as the desert night. The story you'd stepped into was no longer a slow dance with dust and tired hours. It was a reckoning. The stranger's voice wrapped around the stillness. "And while the storm gathers, something's already broken loose in the shadows." You glanced toward the doorway. The newcomer's boots paused, casting a long shape, dragging light thin as a blade across the floor. The night waited, and the desert whispered, cold and certain. The dust was beginning to bleed. The saloon's heavy silence stretched taut, as if the air itself had pulled tight a thread ready to snap. You felt the rough timber of the bar beneath your fingers, a reminder that escape wasn't as simple as stepping through the door. Outside, the desert night pressed against the weathered windows, its cold breath carrying whispers of what was to come. Jack's eyes narrowed, tracing each mark on the crumpled paper, like a man searching for salvation in a fading map. The symbols weren't just ink. They were loaded with decades of forgotten grudges and buried promises, etched by hands desperate enough to gamble everything on unseen stakes. The stranger's voice slithered through the thick air. "These signs, they're the last warnings from those who tried to stop it. And now, it's too late." You shifted on the stool, the grain biting with a roughness that grounded you back in this dim world. The scent of burnt coffee and stale ale hung like a shroud, an acrid reminder of nights spent waiting for something to break, but never quite knowing what. Jack's hand rested just above the worn grip of his pistol, the old metal cold and heavy like a second heartbeat. "If this storm's rolling in," he said slowly, "won't just be dust and dry lightning. It'll tear through everything we thought was safe." Beyond the half-closed shutters, the wind hummed, threading through cracks and rattling shutters with a low, restless rhythm. Somewhere, a chair scraped. A cough cracked the quiet. The saloon seemed to hold its breath, every soul inside drawn tight under a canopy of gathering tension. The stranger's lips tightened into a thin line. Powers hiding in plain sight. Old money, older grudges, and men who'd burn the whole horizon just to see their enemies fall. Jack's gaze sharpened like a blade. "So I'm the key to setting that fire?" The corner rider's eyes flicked toward you, and for a moment, everyone seemed to look through the smoky air, like shadows reading the future in the dust settling on their boots. You could feel the pull, subtle but insistent. The story was no longer something observed at a distance. It was yours, tangled into fragile threads of choice and consequence. The stranger nodded, voice low. "A reckoning's come for this land, and you, Jack, hold the balance, whether you like it or not." The room grew colder, the heavy air shifting as a new presence made itself known. The door swung open again, creaking on its ancient hinges like the groan of secrets, unwilling to stay closed. A figure stepped inside, framed by pale moonlight that poured over dust motes like frozen fireflies. Silent, deliberate. Jack's jaw tightened. His eyes traced the newcomer's face, unreadable beneath the shadow of a battered hat. The atmosphere thickened, the saloon's tired routine shattered by the slow ticking of time. Turning towards ruin. "More ghosts," Jack muttered, voice low as a desert wind through cracked canyons. You felt the pulse quicken, tight, sharp, as if every breath inside was drawn against an unseen current. This was no longer a place of weary survival, but a battleground of secrets loud as gunshots in the night. The newcomer's gaze swept the room, pausing on you for a heartbeat that outlasted seconds. The silence stretched, then shattered with a whispered hiss of leather and iron. "You think you can run from what's buried here?" The voice was hoarse, touched by miles of dust and danger. Jack rose slowly, shoulders squared beneath the weight of history pressing in. The worn floorboards groaned beneath his boots, a metronome counting down the moments before reckoning. "Out here," he said, voice rough like river-worn stone. "The past don't just stay buried. It waits, patient as a vulture circling." The stranger at his side shifted, proxy of a storm about to break. "And tonight," he added quietly, "the dust's about to bleed for the first time in a generation." Outside, the wind kicked up fiercely, rattling shutters and sending a flurry of dry leaves skittering across cracked wood. The stars stretched cold and indifferent. shining down on this twilight hour, when fates tangled like thorny brambles, you swallowed the bitter taste left by burnt coffee long finished, a sharp reminder that comfort had no place in moments like this. The saloon, this hollow refuge of worn souls and whispered deals, was alive, teetering on a knife's edge between survival and chaos. Jack's hand brushed the worn grip of his pistol, fingers curling like iron bands. But he didn't draw yet. Instead, he met the newcomer's eyes, a silent challenge igniting between two men, fencing with history and fate. "You say this game's been played in shadows too long," Jack said, voice low. "So what's the play now? Truth spilling into the wind? Or just more bones to bury before dawn?" The newcomer's humorless chuckle faded into the breathing silence. "Sometimes truth hurts worse than lies. And I reckon the flames are about to consume everything." A gust slammed the door open, slicing a cold breath through the saloon. Hats shifted, coats flared. The room contracted, pinched tight between past sins and future threats. Step by step, a shadow detached from the night outside, creeping forward like a living riddle wrapped in leather and dust. No words, just presence, heavy with stories too long whispered. Jack fixed the new arrival with a glare that spoke of hard miles and harder promises. "Welcome to the reckoning," he said slowly, the weight of countless battles pressing each word. The newcomer's eyes gleamed with restless fire. "Reckon it's time everyone learned how much blood the desert's really thirsty for." You leaned forward on the stool, the rough wood biting sharp beneath your fingers. A tether to this moment, thick with old wounds and new dangers. The night outside grew darker still, swallowing the last embers of twilight like an unrelenting beast. The scent of those burnt pots and stale ale mingled with the dry night air, a reminder that some fires never truly die. They merely wait for the dust to settle before the burning begins again. And as the shadows inched closer, the slow creak of the saloon's door whispered a truth you couldn't ignore. This was no longer just a gathering in a forgotten place. The game had begun, and the cards were already dealt. The saloon, still wrapped in that thick, heavy silence, felt like a breath held since the dawn of the dusty day. You could almost hear the slow settling of decades pressing down on the worn wooden beams, a quiet that leaned into the spaces between creaks and whispers. Jack stood in the flickering lamplight, a silhouette etched by all he'd carried across miles of cracked earth. His fingers lingered on the crumpled slip of paper, the strange symbols, a ghost of a storm he'd spent too long trying to outrun. He met the stranger's steady gaze, knowing that whatever drew this night tight was finally stretching its full wingspan over them. "I've spent years running from the dust of old debts," Jack said, voice low but steady. But some debts don't just settle quietly in the wind. They blow back like a desert storm that strips everything bare. The stranger nodded slowly, the shadow under his hat never giving away more than a hint. It's never been just about survival, Jack. It's about what you're willing to fight for, what you're ready to burn, so the next dawn can rise differently. Outside, the desert wind had softened, folding the night in a hushed embrace. The stars blinked quietly above, silent witnesses to the moment, where past and future bowed to the fragile present. The newcomer at the door finally stepped fully into the oil lamp's glow, a calm presence contrasting the weight heavy in the room. No longer just a shadow, but a figure shaped by choices and the ghosts that trail long after the last gunshot. The subtle creak of boots across floorboards struck a slow, sure rhythm, a heartbeat measured but unyielding. Jack let out a breath that carried more than was said. So, what's left when the dust clears? Acres burned, ghosts stirred, and the faint hope for something less bitter. A chance, the stranger said quietly, to close old chapters with the truth laid bare, not with fire, but with the weight of stories finally told. The barkeep, who'd been scrubbing the same worn table for hours, paused and glanced their way. A quiet nod passed between the men, a tacit acknowledgement that whatever storms had brewed, here was a chance to stand firm, not just survive. A moment where the tired rhythms of constant waiting might find a crack of light. You settled deeper into the rough wood of the stool, the grain pressing a reminder that comfort was a stranger here. Yet in that rawness, there was something honest, something resolute. The smell of burnt coffee and stale ale seemed to soften now, less a warning and more a memory of all that had been endured. Jack's eyes flicked briefly outside, where the desert stretched wide and dark, but no longer hostile, more a vast canvas, waiting quietly for what would come next. The stranger unfolded then, paper one last time, tracing the mysterious symbols with fingertips steady and sure. These marks, he said, were warnings, yes, but they're also keys, calls to wake up, to face what no one dared confront before. "And what if the whole thing's just a trap?" Jack asked, voice threading between suspicion and hope. "Then we face it anyway, because some truths don't wait, and some debts only settle when you stare them down in the dust." The room, once taut with tension, seemed to inhale fully and then exhale a long breath. The patrons, the riders, the barkeep, all shared a silent moment wrapped in the worn timbers and fading light. The reckoning was no longer a distant storm, but a dawn edging closer. Outside, the wind softened further, gently shifting the brittle leaves, as if turning the first page of a new quiet chapter. Jack lowered himself back onto the stool, the weight on his shoulders visibly easing, if only a little. The stranger mirrored the motion. No grand gestures, no fireworks. Just the steady heartbeat of resolve, grounded in the dust and grit of the land. You felt it too, a calm, settling among the worn edges of this place. Not the kind born from forgetting, but from facing. An acceptance of the stories tangled into boots, hats, and burnt pots. The kind of peace that comes not from the absence of storms, but from knowing they pass and leave space for something new. The saloon's murmurs returned, softer now, less fragile. The clink of glasses held no threat, but a quiet fellowship, a celebration of endurance, and the possibility of what lies beyond dust and dusk. Jack caught your eye, a faint, weary smile tugging at the corners of his weathered face. This land's got more stories to tell yet, maybe with a little less sorrow. Outside, the stars blinked their slow, ancient rhythm, the desert breathing gently around the tired bones of the day. And you, settled now, felt the slow pull of night's promise, a whispered invitation to rest, to dream beneath the watchful sky, knowing the dust had finally settled here, at least for a while. The saloon's heavy door creaked closed softly behind you, sealing silence with a sigh. And somewhere, deep in the quiet pulse of the night, the desert exhaled peace as the story folded gently into the long, welcoming arms of sleep.